Hello and welcome to Critical Success. I'm Adam, and today I'm going to be talking about player agency in tabletop role-playing games. What is it, why is it important, and how much should your players have? So to start things off, let's ask ourselves what exactly player agency is. Within the social structure of a gaming group, player agency is the capacity of the player characters to act freely and make their own choices. For some people, the most prominent draw of a tabletop role-playing game is the idea of playing a game which, unlike a traditional board game or card game, allows for agency. I've often heard the concept of RPGs presented as a game in which you can do anything, and I've even said this myself a number of times, but to what degree is that the entire truth? In a lot of ways, that answer is entirely dependent on both the GM of the group and the players themselves. If you've been a member of the RPG community for a while, then you've most likely been a part of at least one discussion about whether a campaign should be run as a sandbox or a railroad. I'm going to discuss both of those ideas and what exactly they mean, as well as the middle ground between them and how to find the style that works for you. A sandbox is a campaign in which players not only have nearly unlimited agency, but are encouraged to create an adventure of their own through their character's exploration of the world. When running a sandbox game, GMs typically will prepare an overview of the world or explorable areas, leaving most of the details about any given person or place out, choosing instead to flesh out those elements as they come up during play. These types of games have the benefit of being relatively light on prep, but can introduce the challenge of forcing the GM to improvise often. It can be difficult to know what players are going to do or where they're going to go before the start of a session, preventing you from preparing optimally. I suggest that if you plan on running a sandbox style game, you talk to your players at the end of each session or a few days before each session to gauge what sort of plot hooks they're interested in pursuing or where they plan to go, so that you have some idea of what to prep. It's also worth mentioning that this style of game is suited to players who have some experience role-playing and know how to take initiative. Giving the party all of the freedom in the world won't force them into exploring your world, making decisions, or following any possible adventure hooks. It takes a lot of practice to run a sandbox game in a way that will feel smooth and satisfying to your players. When this type of game is done right, by the end, players should be able to look back and feel like it was more of a railroad, because a good GM will be able to take the choices made by the players and connect them with some type of cohesive story that feels like it is driving the events forward. And chances are, your first sandbox game will not look so smooth by the end, and that's okay. Each campaign you run is a learning experience that you can build upon. A railroad-style game is the exact opposite. These are story-driven games with very few chances for players to deviate and create their own paths. These are the games you'll see run by GMs who get into the hobby because they want to tell grand stories. These games can be incredibly fun for players who want to be led through an adventure and enjoy discovering all of the twists and turns, but lackluster for those who appreciate the freedom that the core concept of role-playing games allows for. Some GMs can get around these drawbacks by giving the illusion of free choice, essentially allowing the players to make decisions freely, but putting the same outcome at the end of each of those branching paths. This type of illusionism in GMing is something that I like to use very sparingly. If, for example, your players are exploring a completely new part of the world which hasn't been mapped at all, and there's a particular village or settlement that you'd like them to come across because it's important to your game, or just because you have a fun side adventure set in that settlement, there's typically no harm in waiting to choose the exact location until the party is on a clear course and placing it directly along their path, making them feel as though they stumbled into it by coincidence. If you use this technique too often, however, it will be blatantly obvious to more experienced players that they're being pulled on a set path along which the decisions they make are virtually meaningless. Of course, not all games fit into one of these two styles completely. In fact, most campaigns fall somewhere in between the two. Every group is different, and as a GM, you will over time discover what works best for you and the groups you play with, developing a style all your own. The best tip that I can give to new GMs is to try different ways of running your game and see what your players respond to the best. Some GMs will find success in weaving intricate tales with intrigue and linearity, while others will find themselves better suited to creating adventures on the fly based on what the situation calls for. And in the same way, some players will prefer a game with the freedom to roam and discover, while others will want to experience a well-planned narrative. Personally, I tend to run games that fluctuate between styles as they progress. I like to let my players explore the world to any extent that they'd like, prepping only very lightly for most sessions. Then when they find themselves in a position where they have to take on a major conflict, things become a little more structured and heavily prepared. With this style of game, I can give my party the freedom to choose how they would like their characters to interact with the world, then turn that adventure into a deep and satisfying story. One of the most important things I think can be said on this topic is that you shouldn't be afraid to do what you are best at. Don't waste your energy comparing yourself to other GMs and trying to emulate them. For new GMs especially, seeing streams and watching experienced groups play can set an expectation that your game should follow a deep plot line that is intertwined with each of your characters and their backstories. But the truth is that as long as you help to contribute to an experience that is fun for both you and your players, you're a successful GM. And don't feel like the pressure to create a meaningful story is all on your shoulders. After all, the most beautiful and deepest moments in any popular live-streamed game are made possible by the fact that the players are experienced in role-playing and invested in contributing to the creation of that story. Well, that's going to be it for today. Hopefully this video helped to explain a little bit about player agency, why it's important, and how to use it in a way that suits your style. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what other topics you'd like me to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Now go play.